You've always been able to pass your pension down free of inheritance tax, but from April 2027, you won't be able to anymore, which is why the government is forecasting that inheritance tax receipts will jump by over 50% to £14.3 billion by 2030. The simple fact is that more ordinary working people are going to fall into this 40% tax honeypot. And if you're one of them, you might be a bit ticked off about it. But at least if you're 50 or 60 now, you've got time to plan. If you're 80 and didn't have this problem until now, it's a different ballgame. Options for avoiding this tax become more limited as you get older, because most strategies require that you have many years to plan with. Time is against you when you're older, and I have clients in this situation now, and many others whose parents are in this situation. Now more than ever, people are searching for a solution that can slash this tax quickly. And there is one innovative plan that can do this, which I'm going to tell you more about today. So in this video, I'll explain what this solution is and how it works. I'll explain the key factors you need to consider before deciding whether it's suitable. And finally, I'll tell you where you can access it and give my personal views on who I think it is and isn't suitable for, as well as one huge mistake that I see lots of people make. Before we move on, if you do want to find out more about sensible estate planning, including all the main rules and strategies, we've created a really comprehensive guide that you can download via our website. I've put a link in the description below for you. Now, before we start thinking about solutions to avoid inheritance tax, or IHT for short, there are a few things we need to do first. One is working out how much money is available to plan with, not to mention what the exact tax liability is. The problem that you have now might reduce naturally over time if you're spending through your capital, or it might get worse. But we need to know this, and the best way to do that is with cash flow modelling tools. So what are they? They sound like the type of boring thing a business accountant might spend his days playing with. Well, simply all they do is take the numbers of your financial position and convert them into a visualization of your future position. Think of a cash flow model like a financial sat-nav. It shows you where you are now and maps out where you're likely heading financially. So here's an example of clients I used this with recently. They're a couple, aged 84 and 80, who wanted me to help them reduce the tax bill they were going to leave behind. By plotting all of their information into the plan, we were able to find out things like their yearly spending capacity. So how much excess income could be spent or given away each year based on reasonable growth and inflation forecasts. We looked at their loss capacity, how much could be taken from the plan immediately or gifted without leaving themselves short in future. And of course, we looked at their current IHT calculation and how that was likely to change by the time they'd reached their life expectancy. A big factor for many people isn't just the tax on their pensions, it's how the pension values could affect the residence nil rate band. This is an allowance that can protect all or part of the value of your home from tax when you're passing it down. But you start to lose the allowance when your estate exceeds £2 million in total value. Now, these can be quite complex calculations, so the fact that the system does it for you at the touch of a button is very helpful. And when you're armed with this information, you can do some sensible planning, which might start with changing your wills and putting things like nil rate band trusts in place. These could potentially prevent you from losing that residence nil rate band and save tens of thousands in tax. If you don't know where you are now though, and where you're heading, it's more difficult to know whether the cost of that planning is worth it or not. If you're interested in this software for yourself, by the way, it is accessible via my cash flow modelling course, which again, I've put a link to in the description below. The course is split into short instructional videos, which teach you how to use the software with a license included. And it is possible for course subscribers to book one-to-one calls with me or one of my team for help and guidance. We'll return to that couple a little later though. For now, let's imagine you've assessed the situation, you know there's a big tax problem, and you want to get rid of it quickly. What can you do? Well, it's fairly widely understood that just giving money away isn't effective, at least not straight away. Gifting money like that would be what's called a potentially exempt transfer. It's potentially exempt from IHT, but only if you survive for 7 years. Not ideal when you're approaching your mid-80s. There are other strategies, and all of them have their pros and cons, but they usually require similar amounts of time to be effective, unless you literally spend it all. You'd have to adopt the George Best mentality though. He once said, I spent half of my fortune on women and booze, and the rest of it I just wasted. Now, whilst I do sort of love the idea of a bunch of 85-year-olds descending on Vegas for one last massive bender with their mates, that's probably not for everyone. So there is one plan that cleverly combines two different strategies together in a single investment vehicle. Important note though, you can't use money inside your pension for this strategy. It must be cash or investments held outside your pension, or possibly tax-free lump sum that you've taken from your pension. If you have non-pension money available to invest, here's how it works. First, the plan is designed to qualify for business relief, which is an established relief in the UK tax system that makes the investment exempt from IHT. As I record this, that relief is unlimited, but from April 2026, it will only be available on the first £1 million of qualifying investments. The issue with business relief, though, as some of you watching will know, is that you have to hold the investment for 2 years before it qualifies for IHT exemption. Before that, it's still subject to 40% tax. So what this provider does is offer to insure that liability for the first 2 years until the investor qualifies, effectively removing the IHT problem immediately in many cases. To give an example, if your estate is already subject to inheritance tax, £100,000 of cash would attract 40% tax, i.e. £40,000. If you place that £100,000 into this plan, the provider insures the investor for £40,000 for 2 years, after which time the insurance policy ends and business relief becomes active. Even better, the provider guarantees this insurance without requiring any detailed medical underwriting. You simply need to confirm you're unaware of any reason you won't survive the 2 years. Now, depending on your age at entry, you might need to survive at least 6 months, and it's also worth noting that the maximum age for entering this plan is 89 years old. But provided you meet these conditions, this plan fully protects you, making it a genuinely effective way to quickly remove money from your estate and reduce IHT without losing access to it. That could provide great peace of mind for you and your family. So far, so good then. But what's the catch? Well, not necessarily a catch, but the most obvious thing is risk. The investment has to qualify for 100% business relief. And to do that, it has to invest in unquoted shares. That means shares that aren't listed on a public stock market and are therefore higher risk. Now, there are many investment portfolios designed to provide access to this relief, and they usually invest into 1 or 2 trading companies, which are purely investment vehicles designed to spread your money across lots of different projects and sectors. They typically invest into things like clean energy and fibre broadband infrastructure, that sort of thing. Areas which provide stable contracted revenues, which is where the customer has a commitment to pay for the service over a long period of time. That may well diversify your money, but the risk is still higher because without a stock market to trade on, there are less people to sell the shares onto in future. Think of it like selling your product in a supermarket versus a small local market. The supermarket just puts you in front of more buyers, which makes it easier to sell quickly. Unquoted shares are like the small local market. Fewer buyers, less liquidity, more risk. There's also a chance, probably a very small one, that a future government could scrap inheritance tax altogether. That would make these investments generally less relevant, which would probably destroy their value. Now, that list isn't exhaustive, but the bottom line is advice is essential to ensure you're comfortable with all the risks. The next important consideration is cost. Business relief portfolios aren't cheap due to the higher management and compliance requirements involved. In this plan, an investment of £100,000 would see you paying an upfront fee of around £2,500, plus annual ongoing charges of 2% plus VAT, or about £2,340 initially. Adding insurance, though, makes those costs rise further. Individual investors aged between 62 and 85 would pay an additional 3.95% per year plus VAT for the first 2 years. And investors aged between 86 and 89 would pay a higher rate of 5.8% per year. Joint investors would pay less, and these extra insurance charges do vanish after 2 years, but clearly they're substantial enough to impact your investment. So why would anyone willingly pay these higher fees? Well, because the payoff can be significant. Investors can effectively get rid of 40% tax immediately, or at worst after just 180 days for older single life investors. And for many, that substantial tax saving makes the extra cost worth it. But what about performance? Taking aside tax advantages, this is first and foremost an investment. So has it delivered the returns you'd be looking for? Well, it's important to say that the provider isn't chasing risky high reward strategies. Instead, they're aiming for steady, consistent growth, targeting around 3 to 4.5% per year after all fees and charges. So have they achieved that? Well, looking back at returns over the past 5 years, in 2020, they were negative. Understandable, given the global pandemic, but in 2022, performance was notably strong. Now, this is particularly impressive considering it was a tough year for many traditional investments, especially typically safe ones like government bonds. Overall, looking at the medium-term picture, you'd have to say that the investment has delivered on its promise of steady, careful growth. As we know, though, future performance isn't guaranteed. So, coming back to our couple from earlier on then, what were we able to do for them? Well, with the involvement of other family members in the process as well, we discussed this strategy in detail, and they confirmed that they were comfortable with the risks of investment. And given that they had more money than they were ever going to be able to spend, they were happy to consider an initial investment of £500,000. That would reduce to £487,500 based on the provider's initial fee. But due to their ages and the fact that it's a joint investment, they were eligible for insurance protection in full from day one. That insurance would cost them 1.46% a year for 2 years, plus the 2.4% VAT inclusive annual admin charge. The tax calculation in the cash flow model therefore showed an immediate saving of £206,839 and a projected future saving of £267,130. So that's a great immediate IHT saving for a couple in their 80s without losing access to any of their capital. But is this strategy, which is offered by a company called Foresight, suitable for you? Before I dive into that, I need to just say here that I don't know your circumstances. So this is not advice, just my general thoughts. But if you're at the younger end of the spectrum for this plan, and there's a minimum entry age of 62, but I'd say anybody from age 62 into their mid-70s who's in good health should seriously think twice about this as an option. The reason being that although it's not guaranteed, probability would suggest you're going to survive another 7 years, which means other, lower risk and probably more cost-effective IHT strategies would serve you better. I also question the value of paying for the insurance if you're younger and generally healthy. The big mistake I mentioned at the start that I see lots of people make, advisors included, is they let the tax tail wag the dog. The first consideration should always be the suitability of the investment, not the tax advantages it provides. Let me give you an example. Here's the 5-year performance of an equity index fund I use regularly, and it's outperformed the Foresight portfolio by around 60% over that period, which means that even with all the tax advantages, you're almost just as well off leaving your money invested in the index fund and paying the inheritance tax. And that's just in 5 years. Now, even with that growth differential, the Foresight plan would still just about have produced the better net result for IHT purposes, because it removes all of the capital from the calculation, not just the growth, as you can see on screen now. But you can see how over long periods of time, the additional risk you're taking might not end up being worth it at all. You could even set up a discretionary gift trust and hold an index fund like the one I've just shown you inside that. And after 7 years, all of it would be free of IHT. So it does make me think that if you're younger, there are better strategies, and this plan is more suited to older investors with less time and fewer options available to them. So the Foresight Accelerated IHT plan could be attractive for the right person in the right circumstances. And if you think that person is you or a family member, speak to your financial advisor. Or if you don't have one, feel free to reach out. I don't think it's a silver bullet though. And if you're younger, in good health, and you want to get some immediate IHT relief, a discounted gift trust would in many cases be a better option. I explained how that works and other trusts in the video you should be able to see on screen now. If you can't see it, it's in the description below. But as IHT is becoming more and more of an issue, I will be covering trusts and other strategies in upcoming videos. So if you haven't already, pause the video now, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and then watch this video next. I'll see you there.